If I say the name, Elizabeth Short, a few of you might nod politely. You might think, okay, that sounds familiar. But if I say the Black Dahlia, every single one of you instantly has an image in your head.
Oh, absolutely.
You're picturing like a noir film, rain-slicked streets, a femme fatale, this gruesome, unsolved mystery that has haunted Los Angeles for, what, nearly 80 years now?
Yeah, almost 80 years. And that right there is the tragedy we're unpacking today. Because the instant she became the Black Dahlia, the actual human being named Elizabeth Short effectively ceased to exist.
She was just overwritten.
Completely erased.
Wow.
We have this cultural icon now, this macabre legend printed on t-shirts and true crime book covers. But the woman herself is lost in the mythology surrounding her own death.
Exactly. It's a case of two deaths, really. The physical murder, which was horrific enough, and we're going to get into the forensics of that, and then the death of her identity. So today, the mission for our deep dive is to try to reverse that second death. We are stripping away the noir glamour, the rumors about her being this, Hollywood hopeful or a vamp, and we're looking at the cold, hard reality.
And to do that, we are pulling from a really fascinating stack of sources for this deep dive. We have the original FBI archives, which give us the forensic timeline without the media spin.
Which is crucial.
It is. We also have historical records from Wikipedia, and most importantly, a compelling new investigation by author Eli Frankel. He was recently interviewed on Surviving the Survivor, and he's dug up documents that fundamentally reshape what we think we know about her final days.
And crucially, who might have killed her. So let's just start with the victim, because if you watch the movies or read the old pulp novels, Elizabeth Short was this aspiring actress prowling the streets of Hollywood looking for fame and maybe a little trouble. That's the standard bio, right?
That is the narrative, yes.
Yeah.
It fits that whole Hollywood Babylon vibe perfectly, but it is almost entirely fiction.
Right.
When you actually look at the record, and this is something Eli Frankel emphasizes heavily in his research, Elizabeth Short had 0 known acting credits. None.
So she wasn't even doing the waitress by day, audition by night grind.
She never auditioned for a single role. She didn't have an agent. She wasn't an extra. She wasn't courting studio executives at the Trocadero. She was in Los Angeles, yes, but she wasn't looking for fame. She was looking for security.
Security and love, from what I read.
Exactly. The aspiring actress label was just something people projected onto her because she was young, she was pretty, and she happened to be in LA.
I mean, it makes the story more tragically poetic in a Hollywood sense if she's a starlet cut down in her prime. But if she wasn't chasing the bright lights, what was she actually doing?
She was surviving, just scraping by. And honestly, the press at the time didn't just stop at calling her an actress. The Examiner and the Herald Express basically painted her as a devourer of men.
Ugh, the media coverage was so gross.
It was. They heavily hinted she was a prostitute, or at the very least, a woman of loose morals who, this is the subtext, maybe got what was coming to her.
Which is just classic 1940s victim blaming. She was out late, she wore black, she was asking for it.
Precisely, but we have to fact check this right now. The grand jury at the time looked into this specifically because it was relevant to the investigation. They found absolutely no evidence of prostitution.
Not at all.
None. She wasn't working the corners. She was usually flat broke and relying on friends or men she was dating to buy her dinner.
And while we're debunking these rumors, we have to address the other side of that coin. I've read these bizarre accounts claiming she was physically unable to have sex, that she had, what's the medical term they use?
Infantile genitalia.
Right. It's this weird contradictory rumor where she's supposedly a man-eater, but also a tease who couldn't actually physically seal the deal.
It's a completely bizarre myth. And it was used by armchair detectives to explain why a man might have snapped and killed her. The theory was she led him on and then physically couldn't follow through, so he went into a rage.
But it's just not true.
It's entirely false. The autopsy report is a matter of public record. It showed completely normal anatomy. She had a slightly smaller than average uterus, yes, but absolutely nothing that would prevent intimacy. These were just stories invented out of thin air to sell papers and spice up the narrative.
So if she wasn't a starlet, and she wasn't a sex worker, and she wasn't some medical anomaly, who was the real Elizabeth Short?
She was a drifter, really, and an incredibly tragic one. She was born in Boston, suffered from severe asthma as a kid, so she was sent to Florida for the winters. But to understand why she was in LA at all, you have to understand the trauma involving her father, Cleo Short.
This is the part of the story that always just gets me. It reads like something out of a Dickens novel.
It really does. During the Great Depression, her father parks his car on a bridge, leaves it running, maybe leaves a coat nearby, and just vanishes.
Fakes his own suicide.
Fakes his suicide. He abandons the family completely to escape his financial debts. Elizabeth grows up her whole childhood thinking her father is dead.
That is a massive core abandonment trauma right there.
And it gets worse. Years later, he resurfaces in California. Elizabeth is just a teenager, she's struggling with her health, and she finds out her dad is actually alive. So she travels all the way across the country to live with him, hoping to finally have that father figure she lost. She's looking for a safe harbor.
And let me guess, it is not a happy, tearful reunion.
He treats her like an unpaid maid. He's cold, he's incredibly demanding, and eventually he kicks her out on the street for being quote-unquote lazy because she wasn't keeping the house to his exact standards.
So she is abandoned twice by the exact same man.
Exactly. So when we find her in 1947, moving from boarding house to boarding house, constantly relying on the kindness of strangers, she isn't prowling for trouble. She's looking for a home. She's looking for someone to take care of her because the primary person who was supposed to do that completely failed her.
Which makes what happened to her even more heartbreaking. She was vulnerable, she wasn't predatory. Let's move to the timeline. January 15th, 1947. The morning she was found.
Right. And this is where the new insights from Eli Frankel really start to change our picture of the crime itself.
Because the standard story, the movie version, the legend you always hear, is that the body was deliberately displayed. That she was posed right on the sidewalk, practically a public art installation of gore, meant to shock the entire world.
That is what everyone thinks. The idea of the killer as this Joker-like supervillain showing off his gruesome work. But let's look at the actual witness, Betty Bersinger. She was a housewife walking with her toddler in Leimert Park that morning.
Okay.
Now, Frankel interviewed Bersinger's daughter and looked closely at the original police reports. Betty didn't see the body because it was out in the open on the sidewalk.
She didn't?
No. She only saw it because she happened to look 12 to 14 feet back into the vacant lot, deep into the tall weeds.
Wait, so the body was not on the sidewalk at all?
It was hidden. It was discarded. Betty only spotted the pale white skin of the body through a tiny gap in the weeds. If she hadn't looked at that specific angle at that specific moment, Elizabeth Short might not have been found for days, maybe weeks.
Wow, that completely shifts the psychological profile of the killer.
It shifts it entirely. If you pose a body on a park bench or a sidewalk, you are screaming for attention. You are proud of what you did. But if you dump a body deep in the tall weeds of a vacant lot, you are treating it like trash. You are trying to conceal the crime or at least buy yourself time to get away. It suggests panic or a distinct lack of pride in the work.
But the state of the body, I mean, we have to talk about it because it is central to why this case exploded. Even if it was hidden in the weeds, the damage done was incredibly specific. It wasn't just a murder, it was a methodical mutilation.
It was a hemicorporectomy. She was cut completely in half at the waist. And she had what's known as the Glasgow smile. Her face was slashed from the corners of her mouth out to her ears. But the most forensically significant detail for investigators was the blood. Or rather, the total lack of it.
Exsanguination.
Right. The body was completely drained of blood and scrubbed clean, likely with gasoline. This did not happen in that vacant lot. You cannot cut a human body in half in a grassy field without leaving a massive, massive amount of evidence.
It would be everywhere.
Exactly. She was killed somewhere with total privacy, somewhere with a drain and running water. Drained, cleaned, and then transported to Leimert Park.
And they found a cement sack nearby with some watery blood in it and a single heel print. But essentially, the crime scene where she was dropped was completely sterile.
Which brings us to the investigation phase. And you really have to give the FBI credit here. This was 1947, no computers, no DNA databases, no internet. But they identified her body in 56 minutes.
That is incredibly fast, even by today's standards. How did they pull that off in the 40s?
They used a sound photo machine. It was basically a very primitive fax machine. They took her fingerprints directly from the morgue, scanned them, and wired them across the country to Washington, D.C.
And her prints were just already in the system.
They were. Elizabeth had applied for a job at a military commissary at Camp Cook a while back, and she also had a prior arrest on her record for underage drinking. So her prints were on file. The match came back in under an hour.
So the authorities know exactly who she is almost immediately. And this is where the media enters the story in the most despicable way possible. I honestly get angry every time I review this part of the sources. It feels like it should be illegal, even if it wasn't back then.
It is truly a historic low point in journalism. Reporters from the Los Angeles Examiner get the identification from their police sources. They immediately call Elizabeth's mother, Phoebe Short, all the way in Boston. But they do not say, "We have bad news about your daughter."
No, tell them what they said. It's unbelievable.
They told her, "Congratulations, your daughter just won a beauty contest in California."
I can't even imagine. They're pumping this poor, unsuspecting woman for information, getting all these background details, asking for anecdotes about her childhood.
And only after they had the scoop, after they had the exclusive story and the quotes, did they finally tell her, actually, she hasn't won a contest. She's been brutally murdered.
Just sickening.
It was cruel, it was highly manipulative, and it set the tone for the entire media circus that followed. They treated Phoebe Short as a resource to be mined, not a grieving mother to be notified.
And that circus included the invention of the name, the Black Dahlia.
Right, which was likely a media invention. There are theories that it came from a drugstore clerk in Long Beach playing on the popular movie from the time, The Blue Dahlia, starring Alan Ladd. Elizabeth wore a lot of black sheer clothing. She had that striking jet black hair. But regardless of who coined it, once that name was printed, Elizabeth Short was gone. She was just a character in a detective story.
Now let's look at the timeline of her disappearance. There's this famous missing week. She vanishes on January 9th and her body is found on the 15th. For decades, the prevailing theory was she was out partying or she was held captive by some maniac doing something illicit.
And here is where Eli Frankel's research drops a massive bombshell on the accepted narrative. He meticulously analyzed her luggage, her letters, the money she had involved. His theory is that she wasn't partying at all. She was trying to leave Los Angeles.
Fleeing the city.
Yes. She was totally done with LA. She was last seen at the Biltmore Hotel, not to meet a secret wealthy lover for a tryst, as the myth goes, but likely waiting for a bus ticket. She was actively trying to get to Chicago to meet a man she genuinely hoped to marry.
So why didn't she just get on the bus and leave?
A ticket to Chicago cost about $85 back then. Adjusted for inflation, that's over $500 today. She simply didn't have the cash. She was sitting in that lobby waiting for a wire transfer or a prepaid ticket that just never came.
That makes her story so much sadder to me. She was literally trying to get out. She was trying to go start a new, safe life. She was just sitting in that hotel lobby, watching the revolving door, waiting for an envelope that would save her.
Exactly. She wasn't diving into the criminal underworld. She was a stranded, broke traveler who ran out of options.
So, if she was just a young woman trying to get a bus ticket, who stopped her? Who is the hunter? Let's talk suspects.
Well, you have the usual suspects that always come up. The LAPD officially investigated over 150 men. There were roughly 500 confessions over the years, mostly false, driven by severe mental illness or just a sick desire for notoriety.
And everyone who follows true crime knows the name George Hodel.
George Hodel is the perennial favorite suspect. He was a prominent doctor. He allegedly had a secret room in his house. His own son publicly accuses him of the murder. And there's that famous bug police conversation where he says, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they couldn't prove it now."
It's very compelling audio.
It is compelling. You also had guys like Leslie Dillon, a bellhop who was investigated heavily but largely cleared when files placed him in San Francisco at the time of the murder. But there's always been this linkage blindness in the Dahlia case.
Meaning the police were too focused locally?
Yes. They were looking at Los Angeles. They were looking at local surgeons or local Hollywood creeps. But some experts, and certainly Frankel, think we should be looking at other similar crimes across the country.
Like the Cleveland torso murders.
Right, which had similar brutal dismemberments investigated by Elliot Ness, though discounted by LA police at the time.
Right.
Or the lipstick murders in Chicago, which had similar handwriting on taunting notes.
But the connection Frankel draws, and this is the deepest part of the dive today, is to a specific case in Kansas City in 1941, the murder of Layla Welsh.
Yes.
This is the Prairie Heirs connection. And I have to say, when I read the details of this in the source material, the hair actually stood up on the back of my neck.
It absolutely should, because the similarities are forensic, not just general vibes. Layla Welsh was also bisected. She was also completely drained of blood. But here's the detail that you just cannot ignore. This is what profilers call a signature. Something a killer does purely for their own psychological gratification that isn't necessary to actually commit the murder.
And what was this?
Both women, Layla Welsh and Elizabeth Short, had a very specific horseshoe-shaped piece of flesh surgically removed from their thigh.
A horseshoe shape. That's not something you do by accident in a frenzy. That is incredibly specific and deliberate.
It's highly unique. It matches perfectly across both victims. And Frankel points the finger at a man named Karl Bolsiger.
Who exactly was he?
He was a man who knew Elizabeth Short. He was physically in Los Angeles during that missing week. But crucially, he also had deep, deep ties to Layla Welsh back in Kansas City.
So you have a suspect who personally connects the two victims, who's in the right geographic place at the right time, with a highly specific mutilation signature that appears on both bodies. Why on earth wasn't he caught?
Well, according to this new research, the investigation hit a massive brick wall because of bureaucracy and wealth. The Kansas City police allegedly point-blank refused to send the Layla Welsh case file to the LAPD.
Are you kidding me? Why wouldn't they share it?
Karl Bolsiger came from a very wealthy, influential family in the Midwest. His father had serious political pull. It's very possible that the file was deliberately withheld to protect the family's reputation from a scandal, or it was simply jurisdictional arrogance. You know, we handle our own cases. We don't share our files with those guys out in LA.
That is infuriating. You have a potential serial killer and he just walks because one police department won't mail a file to another.
It's a classic institutional failure of that era. There was no centralized database, no internet to run a quick search. If the physical file doesn't come in the mail, the lead just dies. The LAPD never saw the Horseshoe signature connection because they simply never saw the Kansas City report.
So the killer potentially walks free because of red tape and a rich dad. And speaking of lost files, the physical evidence in the Elizabeth Short case is a complete tragedy in itself.
It really is. The killer actually mailed Elizabeth's personal address book and her birth certificate to the newspapers to taunt them. He cleaned them with gasoline, just like he did with the body, to remove his fingerprints. But over the years, the actual LAPD police files, they've just vanished.
You mean they were stolen?
Stolen. Corrupt officers taking souvenirs from the famous Black Dahlia case, things getting misplaced in station moves. We are talking about critical evidence, original interview tapes, physical items. Today, only about a third of the original investigative files even exist in the archives.
That just destroys me. You have a young woman's life, her brutal death, and the only hope for justice, the actual physical evidence, is probably sitting on some retired cop's mantelpiece right now as a sick conversation starter.
It reflects the entire cultural attitude toward the case. It became entertainment, it became a legend. The basic respect for the evidence, and more importantly for the victim, was entirely secondary to the cool factor of being part of the Black Dahlia mystery.
So let's step back and unpack what this all means for us today. We started this deep dive by saying we wanted to find the real Elizabeth Short.
And I think we have found a true glimpse of her. She wasn't a vamp, she wasn't a hooker. She was a 22-year-old woman born in Boston, abandoned twice by her father, who came to Los Angeles looking for stability. She was just trying to get on a bus to Chicago to marry a man and start her life over.
And she ran into a predator, not some cinematic supervillain who wanted to display her to the world as art, but a sadist who wanted to hide his crime in the dirty weeds. A man who likely had done it before in Kansas City and managed to get away with it.
Precisely. The Black Dahlia is a fiction. The reality is a young woman who was failed by the people in her life, failed by the media who shamelessly exploited her death, and failed by the justice institutions that let her killer slip away due to petty red tape and stolen files.
It really makes you think about the concept of the two deaths we mentioned at the start of the show. The physical death was instantaneous, or at least it ended, but the death of her name, the erasure of Elizabeth Short to be replaced by this Dahlia moniker, that's still happening right now.
It is, and it raises a very uncomfortable question for all of us as consumers of true crime. We love the mystery, we love the catchy nickname, but did our obsession with the myth actually hurt the reality of the case?
That is exactly the thought I want to leave you with today. Think about it. If the newspapers hadn't turned this into a sensationalist circus to sell copies, if they hadn't branded her with a catchy movie title, if the police hadn't treated the evidence like cool souvenirs, would the hunter, whether it was Karl Bolsiger or someone else entirely, have been caught in 1947?
It is entirely possible that the legend of the Black Dahlia is the very thing that protected the killer of Elizabeth Short.
Something to mull over the next time you see a movie poster or a podcast logo with that famous nickname. Thanks for diving deep with us.
Take care.